All right, Mr. Finance Director, I'll give you a quick moment. So we had a budget meeting on the 2nd of November? 2nd?
Yes.
And heard presentations from our leadership in the community. And I know there were some tasks and conversations that were had. So with that, Mr. Campo, I'll turn the floor over to you, sir.
Absolutely. So one of the items was just to clarify essentially what was included in the operating budget request versus what was the additional request from our departments. So going through here, you'll see this is our proposed budget versus our default budget. You'll notice a slight change and increase from November 2nd. That is because of the additional position for the firefighters that we had discussed and gotten consensus for from the town council. So what I've done is I've gone through every department that had an increase of over default and kind of broken out the reasons for those, so you'll be aware of what it is. For the town clerk, you'll see it was $1,492 over default. The general reason is their postage has been under budgeted. They need an increase in their overtime line based on Department of Labor laws as well as other things where we get more closer to paying by the minute. We also took their management services line and reallocated it to a more appropriate lines, which is why you'll see the postage have a significant jump up. Do you guys want questions between departments or at the end? How do you?
I'm fine with you continuing.
All right.
And
General government is the next one where there was a $23,375 increase over default. The general causes are an increase in the furniture line as well as increases in the town common expenses as we had just discussed. The furniture line, we're looking for additional storage shelves in the building department, and as well as we have various essentially replacement schedule for furniture that is old and outdated. The town common, as we discussed, is mainly the winter lights on the common.
you change that on the fly? Just kidding. Please continue.
I can make that adjustment, but as we just said, we'll put it out to bid next year to see what we get for numbers and go from there. So I think the 20,000, because here's the thing, although it's 11,000, you can look at the history of that line and it's historically overspent anyways for various other things that occur on the
So
common.
right sizing it.
Yeah. So even if we do stay at the 11,000, the additional 9,000 will likely cover other items that we don't currently budget for that we absorb elsewhere within the budget.
Thank
The
you.
police department, they are $117,122 over default. The general causes, as we discussed at the November 2nd meeting, is training, canine, and IT expenses. So for the training benefits, the federally mandated training requirements, last time they were increased, it was by $15,000 in 2021. The 5-year overage, we have overspent by about $50,656.
How much?
About over 50,000.
Oh, it's right there.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Canine costs, it has not been updated in quite some time, since 2017, back when we had 1 dog. We currently have 3. IT expenses, if you look at the machinery and equipment line for the police department, its budget is currently $100. I'm not sure you can buy an actual computer for $100. Historically, that line has been overspent as well. So again, we're just trying to get it more in line with what it should be.
I don't even think you can buy ink for the whole police department for $100.
Exactly.
Phone.
The fire department, they are $516,034 over default. The general causes is the overtime and associated costs, as well as right-sizing various general ledger account lines. The overtime is to allow for 500 hours per battalion chief of overtime, as well as 600 hours of overtime per lieutenant and firefighter. It also accounts for any concurrent duty overtime that they would incur as well. We tried to get a rough estimate of what we believe that would be going forward. The right size various lines, it adjusts various lines based on the historical spend to allow essentially for them to be more accurate with what's spent and allow the lines to be more properly adjusted.
Thank you.
The public works budget, they are $177,000 over default. The general causes is the work zone safety, CDL training, snow removal, and right sizing the department expense line. So as Dave mentioned, with the work zone safety, this will allow an increase in safety measures, which is currently unsafe because they're working on the road without any detail or additional support to protect our employees. CDL training, this provides us the ability to increase our labor pool. We currently have one open position currently, right? Finally one, but for the past year it's been two. And one of the issues is CDL drivers are getting paid a lot more from the private industry. So the hope is we can bring in some non-CDLs, get them on board helping with various positions, then train them to get the CDL certified and maintain them with that training. Snow removal, the number of outside snow removal services have decreased, which, as we're all aware, likely leads to an increase in the actual cost, which is what you'll see. If you were to look at Massachusetts, the hourly rate for a snow removal person is significant, to put it slightly.
That's Massachusetts.
But if you're in New Hampshire and you can go down there for $100 more per hour,
That's fair.
I would if I were them.
You're right.
And it's not deep Massachusetts, it's the northern parts.
Yep.
It's actually all of them. But essentially, while we're short-staffed or during severe weather, this will allow us to call them in. Actually, if you look at the line in the budget, you'll see there was 1 year, I believe we spent zero. That's because our price didn't compete with anyone around us. And the other one is to right-size the department expense line. We're increasing by $4,000. We've overspent it by about $7,000 over the past 5 years. Solid waste, it's over default by $12,613. This is to allow us to hire an additional solid waste attendant. Currently, we require one of our DPW, actually two of our DPW guys, to go down to the transfer station in addition to their 45 hours that they work. We pay them an overtime rate because it's over the 40 hours. This allows us a part-time solid waste assistant at a lower rate. Hopefully we would be able to find them. And over time it should save us, but we need to actually fill the position first. The last time we had no position, it took about a year to find someone to be able to fill it.
I have a question about the drop-off center.
Yep.
Isn't one, it's supposed to be self-funded? Two, don't we pay them out of the funds we take from in there?
The drop-off center is not self-funded.
It seems that on a regular basis, it's returning money or has an excess. So where does the salary come from that we use now to run the drop-off center?
So for the solid waste attendants, if you look at Department 27 under part-time, you'll see that there is salaries under there as well as the overtime for the Public Works Administration line.
So the intent of the West Road drop-off center is that it's self-funded. That's the intent.
That was not my understanding. My understanding was the intent was to decrease the amount of debris on the side of the road, which is why the prices are considerably lower than surrounding towns.
Okay.
I could be wrong on that, but
So the intent was never for it to be self-funding? Never has been. So perhaps we should have a conversation about that, is that it really should pay for itself. I mean, the rates there are very generous. Perhaps we should have a conversation about it, like other services we offer that are self-funded.
okay,
Do we have a line in there for the revenue that comes in?
we do.
Do we know what that is?
I do, if you give me 1 second.
And we have an excess there that we use for other things, from what I understood. I mean, maybe I'm just mixing things up.
So the budget for it is $115,000 for the revenue. However, I believe we have additional items that get charged to that as well.
If we get like metal rebates or anything, that also goes there. So from what we collect there, the company will then send us rebates. So the drop-off center, the revenue we capture is not just the revenue from taxpayers, it's also any rebates we receive for the disposal of those products.
So what is the total cost of running the drop-off center?
$194,000.
Without salary, so no salary, that's just to get rid of all the items.
Can we have
do
them
you
come to
guys-
the
It's
front?
100. They said it's $194,000, and that's without the salaries associated with it. That's just to get rid of the items from the drop-off center.
And how much did we take in?
Last year we took in $120,797.21.
So we did not break even.
Correct.
I would just ask that it's something that we explore, that as costs continue to go up to, probably to dispose of these items, that we should probably take a look at our fee schedule, which is, it's not a lot now, at least it doesn't appear to be a lot now.
As I said, my impression of it was it's intended to remove the debris on the side of the road, so people aren't just dropping on the side of the road and they're willing to go to the transfer station to remove it. This was established well before I got here,
I understand.
but I have no problem looking at it to see what we can do in terms of
So-
adjusting it to fit more accordingly.
So this is in policy, but in conversations with the former Public Works Director in Engineering, Janusz Krakowski, he gave me the impression that he was always working towards a break-even scenario. Perhaps I took that as it was supposed to be self-funded.
Okay.
So like ambulance fees, as costs go up, we should probably look at our ambulance fees. As costs go up for the drop-off center, we should probably look at our fees. And I'm not looking to be a profit center, but at least to be able
Break
to
even.
fund it properly.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Recreation budget, this is increased by $17,370 over default. The main reason is maintenance budget increase, as well as the department specialized equipment. So we've increased the maintenance lines, as well as established a vehicle maintenance line for them to be able to repair the existing aging equipment within the recreation department. We also established the department specialized equipment to allow us to replace equipment that's more specified to each department, in this case, the recreation. So things such as the playground, or if we need irrigation, things that are aging that we need to get on a replacement schedule. This is one of the budgets, as you can see from the total amount. It's smaller. We're trying to get it more in line to be able to start the replacement schedule now that we have additional people on board to help with that. The library budget. This is over by $12,193 over default. The general causes are furniture replacement and an increase in books and periodicals line. The increase in appropriations for the library's furniture is to allow to replace broken, worn, and damaged furniture due to its age, as most dates back to the building's last renovation about 27 years ago. And the increase in books and periodical line is to address the rising costs of the physical and digital resources. Community development budget is increased over default by $3,000. This is due to a matching grant requirement, and it's intended to provide additional appropriations for outside services to aid in various town planning projects that are in progress, one of which is being funded by a grant which requires a match. So those are what was included within the operating proposed budget.
Thank you for preparing this and putting this together.
Absolutely. Are there any questions on those?
So as I understand it, our current tax rate is it $3.74?
I believe so. I don't have that off the top right now.
So, and this will be $4.28?
For the operating budget, yes, based on the estimated assessment for 2025, that is what we're projecting.
So as the budget stands, without any additional requests, we're looking at a 54-cent tax rate increase.
Correct.
Thank you.
So I have a couple questions. So on the safety for the DPW, is that including police detail in the work safety piece?
It would be, yes.
Is there any way to separate the costs so we can see what both of those are on with and without?
So the intent with it is to leave it as the work zone safety. That way, should we have other options, we're not pulling from, robbing Peter to pay Paul,
You
essentially.
don't have to, I'm not saying separate line items, sorry.
Okay.
I misspoke on that. What I'm saying is, do we know how much each of those costs when we're going into it? Like, how much is the detail cost? Because those seem significantly different enough.
Yep. So I believe when we established it, the initial intent was for just the police details, and then we established the wording of work zone safety to allow us to
Signs, the Jersey barriers.
exactly
Yeah,
have
yeah,
additional items. So initially, the entire intent was for the police detail.
Yep. I'm just wondering if we know the amounts. That's what I'm asking.
So it would be we'll let Dave come up and speak more on this one.
I think I understand what you're driving at. So the way we arranged it, the dollar amount, was we looked at the last few years and what we've done for road work and where our guys were assigned to do it. We came to an agreement that it was about 1,500 man hours that we were using of labor to be out there doing road work. Now, that's not a constant. Every year that's going to change. Some years we're going to do more roads, some years we're going to do less. Some years we're going to have trees that get blown down. We're going to be out there longer than normally. So what we tried to do was just kind of come up with, being this is the first year that we're entertaining this, is that we would come up with a line that we could use it for that. If there's something very large or catastrophic comes up where we need to set up a definitive work zone for a long period of time, we could also rent Jersey barriers. We could also do some advanced warning notifications and things of that nature. So it's not like we're going to rent Jersey barriers every year for $10,000 and we're going to, bring out some attenuators every year for $5,000 and the rest is going to be for details. So it's just a generic work zone safety that would encompass all those aspects to keep the work zone safe. Does that answer your question?
I mean, for the most part. So I'm just, and maybe this is getting too deep into it. I just wondered the calculation that went into that, but I can.
Yeah, it was 1,500 hours, and then we talked to the police department and got their rates, what it is per hour for the detail, and just assign that accordingly.
Perfect. That's what I was looking for.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Any questions from the budget committee?
Okay, so it was kind of a big question, but we're right-sizing lines each year. It seems like each year over the last few years we've been trying to fix some lines. How close are we to having the lines right-sized overall? It seems like we catch something each year where we're like, okay, this was underfunded for the last 2 decades and we're going to fix this. And then the following year we're like, okay, this was underfunded for the last few decades, we're going to fix this. So where have we caught them? Or the vast majority of them? Are we getting there?
We're working.
That's a big question.
It is, but we're working towards it. We were trying to do it in a responsible pace. That way the taxpayers don't see it all in one year. Where we're able to kind of go, and as equipment and as technology increase, the hope is that efficiencies will help save other areas.
So this, what you just presented, is right-sizing everything, correct?
This is right-sizing mainly the overtime lines and training lines.
Okay.
Which is why if you look, the increase from last year's budget, a majority of it comes from the public safety lines. It's either between that and insurance, between insurance, DPW, police, and fire, that is a sizable amount of any of the increase if you look at the total.
So what calculation went into the overtime? Then how was that calculated?
So what we did is we took the last 3 years of hours and we took what the average overtime rate is for each of the divisions and calculated it in that fashion.
Okay.
So we took what an individual will be projected to make next fiscal year, their overtime rate by the average of the last 3 years total overtime.
Does the change in the number of staff change? Because did you take that into account? Because there's been different.
So in the fire department, you'll notice that it has increased in the operating budget for that as well.
Okay.
The problem with this is that,
So, sorry, I don't mean to.
are you done?
Nope, I just realized I need to answer both there. That's what we do for default.
Okay.
I believe the police, for the main part, left it with that. The fire department, with everything going on, they looked at what on average would do it, and that's why you're looking at 600 hours for firefighter, lieutenant, and 500 hours for battalion chief.
So
that-
what went into that calculation then?
So that one we'll need to call up Phil for this.
Okay.
So essentially, we did what they do, and we took 3 years worth of data. We threw COVID out because that skews the whole thing, and we took 3 years worth of data, and we figured out how many hours were used in 3 years for roughly what it would be for 13 people. Obviously, we had 12 last year. We took into account the shifts we dropped down between February and the beginning of the new fiscal year, which was about 1,700 hours, and we factored that in. And what we came up with was the number, and then we also included in that 2 positions of injury, because people get injured in our job. So if we don't factor that in and we have an injury, we're going to be right where we were before, which is not having enough funding. So the 600 hours for firefighters and lieutenants and the 550 hours for battalion chiefs takes into account 3 years worth of hour data averaged out, and then including in 2 positions if people were to be out on injury. So for instance, right now we have somebody who's been out with cancer for a year and a half, right? And that's been cutting into it. This fall we had 3 injuries that have taken anywhere from 3 months to 6 months to heal, right? So we brought that into factor what that number would be to get us through the year at 13.
Is there a different rate of injuries, like on the battalion chief line versus the...
No, the battalion chief line actually doesn't factor in injury.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I should have. The battalion chief line doesn't factor in injury. The battalion chief line just factors in that they carry a lot of time on the books because they have been here the longest, right? So their line just factors in if they were to work 550 hours or to take 550 hours of overtime in the year.
500 hours.
Or 500, I'm sorry. 500. And then the firefighter line does include the injury. The firefighter lieutenant line does include the injury piece of that.
A lot of it's controlled by the way their CBA is written.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's part of it. It's basing that's all numbers based on contractual hours that they have on the books that they can take. In the last 3 years, we haven't had a battalion chief out on injury, right, or off for an extended period of time. It's just been the time that they've taken contractually. Yeah, knock on. Yes, please knock on. Yeah, we don't need that. But yeah, that's.
So that would be the big difference between the default and the increase.
Exactly. And one of the other factors, as he mentioned, last year they dropped from February to June to 11. Mm-hmm. Historically, that's what they've done. So when I take the average hours, it accounts for that drop.
Okay.
That's why you have that giant difference between what what we have in the operating versus what we have in the default.
Right. We tried to come up with because again, trying to guess overtime's like throwing a dart, right? Because you don't know what's going to happen. We don't know storms. I don't know what could happen in somebody's personal life that requires them to be out. We have, because our department's younger, we have people who are having kids a lot more, so they're taking time off for that. So it was an attempt to use data to try to figure out a realistic number. We took the salaries and the overtime rates of what every member would be next year also to come up with that, so that we weren't taking like the highest or the lowest. We were taking what we had on the books to try to get a realistic number.
And for theirs, they did it by individual, where
Right.
mine was an average of everyone.
Right. We plugged it in individually to include the 13th position that is currently open at its lowest rate coming in.
Which for their, I think it's contractually obligated overtime, that's based on per individual, not on an average rate. The same with the police department for their federally mandated, because I know it's going to be tied to that individual. I could go by that, but
Right.
overtime, we don't know who's going to take it.
Yeah.
Right.
So we take the average of who's available and what the rates are.
Okay.
Are we paying for the people out on leave or on injury? Or are they on some sort of long-term?
It depends on what type
Right.
of position they're in. Whether it's short-term, long-term, or workers' comp depends on what we're paying or what we're receiving back.
But I think what you're getting to is you're correct. We're not always, if someone's out, it's not.
So
it's,
you're carrying the full staff
Exactly.
salary burden.
Right.
And if they
The overtime, it
receive,
seems like you're
right, if they receive workers' comp or short-term, they are allowed to supplement with their own time so that they get to 100% of their pay.
And we try to offer, light duty work so that they can come in and assist us in a manner that we would need assistance for to help offset that also.
Yeah, I think we're budgeting a little heavy, considering we're not taking this into account. If we're accounting for the overtime for injuries, we're not accounting for the savings of the salary. I think there might be a little bit wiggle room there.
True, but the intent of this increase is to avoid some of the problems we've had in the recent past, where we're not dropping down, or the intent of this is to be able to stay at 13
Correct.
all the time.
Correct.
Now, if I can comment on that for a minute, it seems unusual to me to say, okay, we need to have 13 firefighters on shift every battalion, but we're only going to have 13 employees on that shift. You know what I'm saying? Like, for my police department that I worked on, if we needed, 10 officers on 10 posts, we would have 15 officers on that shift every day. And if then you're accounting for, 15% take leave and somebody calls out sick and, somebody got hurt, we still have 10 guys to man the shift. Now that's obviously more expensive to have, say, 16 firefighters on each battalion with the expectation that 13 of them are actually there every single day. Is it really cheaper to pay the overtime than it is to have the 3 additional bodies on each battalion? And I realize that that could be way more. I'm asking, like, if we're paying for one guy to take leave, we're paying him to be on leave, and we're paying time and a half to whoever replaces him, is it better to just have more people if we could really staff it?
I'll default to the fire department on this one.
That's a yes. I mean, yes, it would be beneficial to have a amount of people and then set a floor with which we would only drop down to, right? We've never historically, and the fire service has never historically operated that way, right? Yes, we have always said we're going to drop to 11 because funds don't allow for it. But if we have the funding for 15, we want our floor to be 15, right? And so if you look at other fire departments, some of them contractually agree upon what their floor is. Some of them don't have a floor and will drop depending on what the budget is. So that's kind of outside of the...
I'm not suggesting changing the floor.
No.
I'm suggesting having more
Sure.
staff than the floor.
More staff is always helpful. I guess that would help us greatly. It's kind of outside of the norm of how fire departments operate, that mentality of, say, staffing 15, but dropping to 13, right? If we're staffing 15, the goal is to have the money to staff to 15. Same conversation we're having right now. We have 13. The goal is to staff to 13 and be able to cover 13. Again, outside of a large unexpected amount of injuries or storms or whatever the case may be.
I only asked the question to see what might be the cheaper option. But I realize that the system we have now...
And then unfortunately, we were talking about this, if the overtime's taken by a lieutenant paramedic at step 6 versus a firefighter at step 1, it's hard to, and that's the case with the CBA. It could be either of those, so it's hard to say the dollar figure is going to be cheaper because this person takes it versus that person taking it.
The other thing I think with the overtime versus the higher staffing is the benefits portion of it that doesn't get calculated, because benefits aren't part of people's overall salary that they get paid, and the insurance and the rates and how much that's fluctuating as we've seen over the last few years, that's probably a missing piece of it too that will need to be taken into account cost-wise.
So that's a piece of it, but you still pay FICA.
Yep.
You still pay Medicare. Right. You still pay all those other pieces. It costs $150,000 to put a firefighter on the street. I mean, that's what it costs. So it really depends on what you decide you're going to staff at. If you're going to staff at NFPA, I forget the number on it, but the NFPA regulation for 16, then you're going to need 18 firefighters, for a battalion. That's just the way it works. If you're going to staff at 13, you need 15. And what's going to happen long term is that the overtime is going to even out. Okay. And that your overtime budget will actually stabilize over that period of time, depending on what you decide your staffing level is. I mean, it's just the way it works.
The issue for why overtime is where it's at right now is we're at 13, and the expected minimum staffing is 13. So anyone calls out, it's time and a half plus that person. So that's why we're in the situation where you're looking at 600 hours per individual. And I know I said I default to Phil, but essentially I believe it would be assistance to have the difference between what minimum staffing is and what's available. I don't know the exact calculation of where that break even would be, but as Phil said, I don't think the fire department's going to complain with additional staff.
Right. Plus, if every one of your firefighters, according to this averages that you put out there, is working 600 hours of overtime a year, that's a lot of OT for that individual to be working more and be on shift more.
Right.
And it's not like it's not a demanding job, right? So I'm just saying for the future, we might want to consider having a difference between the staffing level and the floor in order to not ask these guys to work 2,600, 2,800 hours, whatever it is, but really only expect them to be there 21 or 2,200 hours. A little bit of overtime is expected.
But are they dependent on those 600 hours of overtime?
That is true. Yes, I get that.
But ultimately, in my position, if I fill the position so that they are all staffed, then the overtime numbers come down, right?
Absolutely.
Because we're not filling vacancies, right? And if overtime numbers come down, people go home on their days off, which is what the way our schedule is set up for that reason, right? And it's better for the whole, right? For the whole department. So,
Yeah, my father's a firefighter.
Yeah,
And
so-
he depended on those overtimes. You know,
Yep.
you can't feed a family on a
And
firefighter's salary alone.
and we express that overtime is not a guarantee, right? You know, but
Anyway, I don't know how that process, I don't know how we get from here to there, but I'd love for you guys to look further into that over this period of time.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, that may be a year, 2, 3 years down the road to finally make that change where we're not dependent on this really significant amount of overtime, but we have more people available. I mean, because even filling the spots would probably be difficult.
Perhaps that could be an analysis that you can work with Justin on.
Sure.
When is that final break even, or when do we actually make it out financially?
But you're never going to get to a final break even. You're only going to get the stabilization. What you have to look at is you have to make a decision as a community. How are we going to run as a community? Are you going to run 4 people on an engine? If you're going to run 4 people on an engine, you're going to run a battalion of 16. I mean, the NFPA bylines lay it out very clearly. If you're running a battalion of 16, are you going to find it acceptable to run your fire department at a level lower than 14? If you don't find that to be acceptable, and you're only going to run a fire department at a level of 16, then you need 18. Your overtime will even out over a period of time.
Right.
It's never going to go completely down. It's going to even out over a period of time, because those same employees, are going to take vacation. They're going to have sick days. They're going to have personal days. And when you start adding up the numbers and everything, and you just simply put it against a 365-day a week, 7-day a week calendar, and you work 4 and 2, right? 2?
it's 1 on, 1 off, 1 on, 5 off.
So when you're working those kinds of schedules and everything, those are the type of numbers you start talking about. The best you can hope for is some sort of stabilization to your overtime. But then you have to commit to the level of staff you're going to have. That's why when we did the budget on Saturday, I brought up the fact that if we're going to do this and stay at 13, you need to be talking about 8 more firefighters. Please tell me if I'm not making any sense, but that's sort of just how the numbers work.
No, that makes perfect sense. And the fact is you could add more staff, but that doesn't necessarily always equal a decrease, because they would be operating like a firefighter typically does not operate in departments all across. So the overtime could actually increase the line itself when you staff more with the intention of lowering overtime, but it doesn't always equal out that way, nor is there any guarantee it will.
You never heard me say flat. You heard me say stable.
Yep.
Doesn't mean it's going to. So when you talk about stabilization, you're talking about a range. That's what the community has to decide. That's what they have to decide whether they want to accept that or not. If the community wants to accept that, then the path forward is to increase staff. If you're trying to stabilize overtime, if you're willing to accept large overtime numbers, with the cost benefit analysis of possibly that you're not going to pay benefits, then that's the decision you make. But also understand that you're also making a decision to only run at 13, and some days you're not going to have 13. You're going to pay overtime, and some days someone's not going to take the overtime. And you're going to run at 12, or you're going to run at 11. That's what's going to happen. That's the reality of it. So that's probably too much of an answer, but am I saying anything that doesn't happen?
No, and ultimately what we tried to come up with for this budget cycle was what it would take to run at 13 for the year without any crazy situations happening, if that makes sense. Major injuries, long-term injuries, lots of storms, things of that nature.
Okay.
I think my question's kind of a two-parter. One, I'm thinking about what Ryan said about his dad wanting the extra overtime because he wants the extra pay. Have we talked to the firefighters on staff and asked them, would they prefer not needing that overtime and maybe getting more time off if we added additional staff versus they like the overtime and they want to keep that overtime?
You're going to get two different answers. You're going to get some people that like the overtime, but I can tell you that we had a lot of holdovers. So when overtime was heavy the last 2 years, like historically heavy, we were getting holdover after holdover because we were trying to maintain staffing at a certain level, and guys were and girls were not taking it, and we were holding people over, and holdover was going up. So I think, again, there's a threshold of how much somebody can take when mentally and physically when it comes to working, right? In all of this, there is a threshold. And at a certain point, you cross that threshold from the overtime is great to I need to go home and have a mental break.
With this in the overtime budget, we're right sizing it. Would we kind of see this as the upper limit of what overtime could be? Like,
So
this
just
is like worst case scenario,
just to
or?
clarify here, we're right sizing it for next year.
Yes, exactly.
This changes the year after.
Okay.
This is one that it's not going to remain. It's
Right.
going to fluctuate, and they're going to have to recalculate what they believe it will be based on the status of everything.
Okay, so we're right
So-
sizing it for the following year only.
For fiscal
Okay.
year 26, correct.
So is that calculation a ceiling, like worst case scenario? This is how much overtime we need, or this is how much overtime we think we need on average? We'll probably eat through all of it, or?
To our best abilities, it is what we think will allow us to staff at 13 to include 1 or 2 injuries at the highest, like a lieutenant paramedic top step injury, right? That's what we got. So that number is a little high because we took the highest possibility of a person that could get injured to figure that out versus taking the low, because I think that would be lowballing.
Right, and then we'd be in the same problem.
Right, we'd be
next year.
exactly,
So, okay.
exactly.
Got it.
But again, I come back to that's factoring too. I don't think it's responsible. Myself and Schneider don't think it's responsible to come forth to you and say we want you to have enough money to cover 3, 4, 5, 6. That's unrealistic, and that's irresponsible, right? I think 2 people is a responsible increase or a responsible, I guess, estimate of what could happen.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Anyone else? Quickly.
I know we're talking about the operating budget right now, but we're talking about how much risk is built into this budget. I just think that if there's enough risk built into this budget, we should be a little bit skeptical about an additional contingency fund. Just something to think about and discuss. We didn't really discuss it last time. Again, if the risk is appropriate, do I need the extra fund? I think there's also risk built into the operating budget in general. So,
Justin, is that something that we can actually have as a contingency fund?
Yes, it is. Per RSA 3198A.
The contingency budget too is being fully funded by the undesignated fund balance this year as well, so there's no tax impact to the contingency fund.
And anything that is charged to that has to go before the town council as well and be reviewed and published in the annual report so the taxpayers are aware of exactly what was charged to that fund.
Refresh my memory, what are we funding it? How much is it?
It is $396,668.
And is that invested the same way UFB is invested?
So it essentially will act as a UFB we can draw on. Right now, unlike the school, we're not able to draw on UFB unless it's an emergency situation. This will allow it to be drawn on with the approval of the town council.
But if that $400,000 was in the UFB, we would invest that and make whatever interest on it.
Yes.
Are we gonna get the same kind of revenue if we don't touch it?
Yes. To the best of my knowledge, essentially, it will act as though cash flow wise, it'll act as though it is part of the general fund.
But it's not the same as being in there, because when we are looking at our finances and what we have in the UFB, that's actually drawn down and it does not count towards that amount.
Towards the UFB amount, but he was asking about the interest that's earned on. Yes, so essentially, it will segregate that out from the UFB.
Yep, and it'll
into this fund, and then my understanding of the fund, I have to get further clarification from DRA, is it has to be reestablished every year. It's not a set it and forget it. So next year, it again will be based on the calculation and go from there. And this amount will return to UFB if whatever is not used. And essentially, the way I look at it is it allows an additional appropriation for emergency situations, for contingencies such as this, where overtime is going higher than anticipated.
Okay. We go with fire? Gentlemen? All right, thank you. Please continue.
All right.
So before we go on to the requests outside the operating budget,
Yes.
and looking at the sheet that you gave us here and everything, not including the CBAs, if everything goes on the ballot here and passes, we're looking at a 93-cent increase on the tax rate.
Does that include your 52-cent number from earlier?
Yes.
Can I say something about that?
Yeah.
So we're looking at 93 cents before we.
And that's based on
That's with
2023's
and that's,
tax rate,
I
not
understand
2024's.
that. And also based on the CBAs that we have not sent to the ballot yet. We haven't come up with numbers on those yet because we haven't concluded negotiations.
Correct.
Okay, so it's not unrealistic that if those were to be included in this as well, we'd be looking at somewhere around $1.20. Minimum.
Yeah, minimum.
Okay, so we're going into this conversation right now, going up $1.20. That's just,
Assuming everything passes, correct.
I just want to make sure everybody, when we start talking about this, you know where we're at.
And again, that's based on 23's tax rate. 24's has not been set yet.
Right, so that's based on that, so we're looking at minimum $500 on a $500,000 home,
just the town.
just the town side.
Yes.
So before we start having this next conversation, that's our starting point.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that.
No, it's totally fine. It's a good lead-in for what I'm about to say. I'm sorry I missed Saturday. I was in Chicago for work, so I really apologize. But when I watched back, you guys, I am appalled at what I saw. I really am. We're not spending cheerleaders. That is not our job. That is not our job. It was very disappointing. So that's all I had to say. It's irresponsible and it's privileged thinking that we can all afford this stuff.
I don't think there was any privileged thinking going on. I think there was discussions going on about what's a priority.
Are you thriving? Like, come on.
All right.
No.
Okay. Anyway,
That's all I had to say.
point is, I think that we're trying to figure out the balance, as always, between services and taxes, right? And there seems to be some recent history and people speaking at town council meetings saying that, they expect the services to be maintained. And so we're trying to make a clear picture of what it takes to do that.
Well, respectfully, I don't think they're asking for them to be maintained. I think they're asking for excellent services.
Fair enough. I may have been downplaying.
I think that's what they're asking for. And if we're going to have an open and honest conversation with the community, that's why I brought up that you're looking at $1.20. The schools are looking at $8.7 million for kindergarten. They also are looking at the teacher's contract coming forward, in this voting year. What you're also looking at is is an increase in medical here from $41,000 for a family plan to $45,000 for a family plan, which is in this budget already. And we all know that the cost of everything has gone up over 20%. So if we just as long as we're going into this eyes wide open, we're looking at, you could be looking at sending to the voters, upwards of $2 on the tax rate. I mean, if you look at the schools in the town, and we're only 23% of the budget. So just, I don't want to, pull the air out of the room or anything, but once you bring this up, at least everybody's on the same page. And if that's what the community wants to do, so be it.
So when I look at this, I mean, I'm glad you brought up the numbers, John. 54 cents on the tax rate is a lot. But what we've talked about, the discussions we've had with everybody here, the discussions we had before on this, it all falls in the realm of something, well, what I would call reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
$1.20 just for the town and the tax rate is not something I'd say falls within the realm of reasonable. And I think once we cross this line, this is the frosting on the cake that comes through. And, when we're sitting there asking them to come up with more money to spend, that's where I'm saying we're crossing that line into it. And so everything past this line is frosting as far as I'm concerned. And, we can look at it, but
Sean,
we've got to
agree
keep
with
my
you.
people.
I'm not necessarily interested in where this presentation goes from here. No offense, Justin.
Yeah.
That I feel like
I wanted to separate them out so you understood. So everyone's aware, this does not include the warrant articles
Yeah.
you also see on there. This is just the additional items that were presented in that budget that are not part of the proposed.
And this isn't me just trying to grandstand here. There's been people who saw that meeting, heard that number, and boom, this is around like, do I need to start making plans to move? And there's real people behind these numbers we're affecting, and that's where I'm worried about it.
You're completely right. SB2 was designed to be a tax cap. That's what it was. And that's why we've operated the way we have, is we operate it like it was a tax cap. And that's why the tax rate is what it is. But if the community's calling, and I'm not advocating one way or the other, if the community's calling for something else, then we need to know what it is and how much it costs.
People need to know what the numbers are if they want to increase staffing.
And look, hopefully we'll get feedback.
Well, staffing comes separated out. So staffing generally comes in warrant articles and other things. The stuff beyond this line generally is not increasing staffing. It's other things.
Well, no, I mean, looking ahead, this is what we're looking at.
Oh yeah, then like I said before,
This
this
is what
the
you're
conversation.
calling icing on the cake is more staffing, essentially.
but I
The
don't-
major
I don't think
numbers
that's where
here
we are.
beyond
I
this
think that-
point are staffing.
I wouldn't say the major numbers are, but
Look at,
we can
you
go
got
through it.
2.5, you got 1.2, you got another 1.8.
Well, hold on.
Why don't we get to it? Yeah.
Can we,
Yeah.
can we, thank you.
I just wanted to lay the groundwork.
Yeah.
So, one of the requests that we've received is a warrant article for $20,000. $10,000 will be raised through fundraising and donations, so there will be no impact to the taxpayers on that $10,000, and the remaining $10,000 will be through the warrant article. This is to improve and upgrade, or not upgrade, to improve our current Welcome to Londonderry signs that are about 13 plus years old and are starting to deteriorate and show their age, I guess is the best way to put it. I have John here from Beautify Londonderry if we have questions regarding this. Or I can continue with the next item.
Any questions?
Do you want us to ask along the way, Chad, or save it?
On this one, if you don't mind, just because I feel bad that we're keeping him here just for this one.
Yeah, so how
Don't
many?
mind, sorry.
Yeah, how many signs is Beautify Londonderry looking at for?
5.
So 5 signs. So that is what, $4,000 per sign.
That's correct.
So what went into that number to come up to the 4,000?
John, do you mind coming up to the podium, please? Thank you.
John Mayen, 26 King Arthur. a couple things. One is there are 5 signs up there. We talked to a number of different companies. We're actually back with the original sign maker. If you look at the sign, it's fairly intricate in what was originally designed. So that's one of the issues. What's involved is they need to basically unbolt these signs, take them up to their facility in Littleton. Some of these signs will have to be stripped back down to bare wood. Then they'll have to come back down. I didn't put the pictures in of some of the posts. The posts are starting to crack on all these signs, so they're going to have to probably leave those in place, fill them with a Bondo type filler, sand them down, paint them in place. There are balls on top of the posts that have to all be repainted. One of the things you might want to think about here is, these signs have been out there at least 13 years. Your house probably wouldn't stand without a good repaint if it stood out there for 13 years in the weather, like these signs have had. This one is the one on North Rockingham Road, up by the construction company equipment up there. You can see if you look at it, it's starting to delaminate there, it's starting to fall apart. The next one, if we could ever flip to that next slide, is this is a bullet hole in our sign over on Rockingham Road. These are just some of the examples of what's gone on over 13 years. They've sort of stood the test of time, but time doesn't stop for anything. So it's sort of time for us to fix these signs. It includes taking the signs down, repairing them, basically returning them to an as-new shape, and then reinstalling them in place. It also potentially includes replacement of the sponsor signs, because we do have a fundraising component to this. And if you ever get the chance to look up close, there's a sponsor sign next to each of these signs. Some of the sponsors that we currently have on those signs are no longer there. They're companies that don't exist anymore. So part of our new fundraising effort will be to find new sponsors for those signs. So it would include that. And it may include, still to be discussed, depends on where the money ends up, moving the sign. There's a sign over by the Wendy's. Has anybody ever seen that sign? It's okay to say no because it's hidden now by the white rail that they put along the side of the highway there. You can barely see it. So we've talked to Dave from the DPW about potentially raising that sign or potentially finding it a new home someplace. So we could potentially move that sign.
That answer your question?
Yeah, that answered my first question. So now on to the next question.
I'll try not to be as long.
No, you're all good. We have a lot of industrious volunteers in town. I'm sure that could help reduce the cost to zero from the time. If we're putting in $10,000 of our own dollars and you're fundraising $10,000, what happens if you don't hit your $10,000 benchmark that you're looking to set from your fundraising?
Hold on a second, if I can. What do you mean $10,000 fundraising? Because
are the funds already secured?
Is it? Oh, never mind.
So we're gonna through sponsorships and through donations, Beautify Londonderry is gonna raise $10,000. Beautify Londonderry already has a budget. If for some reason we only get $8,000, then the committee could vote to spend the $2,000 to make up the difference. It's not going to come from the taxpayers.
But $10,000.
So currently in Beautify Londonderry's account, there's over $12,000.
Okay.
So if they raise zero, they will still have it. And historically, looking at their last 5 years, the most they've ever spent was $4,300, and that was in 21. Mm-hmm. So assuming they get something, that $12,000 gives them that. I don't know if that answers your question in terms of the cushion that they currently have available.
I'll speak for John and say that John did a due diligence in getting the estimates. It was very difficult to get some of the estimates because some of the companies aren't in business anymore. And John did his due diligence, go out there and get the estimates. So I feel like the estimates are pretty accurate.
Okay. Just going to sit on a little longer. I might have more questions later. I'll shoot you an email.
Okay. Thank you, John.
One question. Have you ever looked at the furniture making organization of the New Hampshire prison system?
We actually use them for the small signs, the sponsor signs. They're very affordable. They don't do this kind of work.
Yeah.
They won't do this.
This is very intricate. Okay. But John is very frugal. I'll speak for John. He's very frugal, so.
You're very kind, sir.
Yeah.
All set?
All right,
Good, I'm good.
Anyone else? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sticking around.
All right, Justin, go ahead, continue.
Alrighty, it was mentioned at the last meeting that Councilor on the Common is looking to increase their town funding by $7,000. That was mentioned to a councilor, so I just wanted to include that in there as well. This would bring their total funding to $17,000.
What does that give us for the extra 7?
You would need to speak with the individual that reached out to them. I can reach out to them and ask them. I know that they're in the process of receiving a $7,500 grant to assist with the cost for the concerts and everything of that nature. So my guess is a higher level of performer, but I don't want to speak on their behalf.
Yeah, I heard the same thing.
I just heard they're trying to get the level of performance upgraded.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
This is the item that we had spoken about with special event costs that we essentially absorbed through the budget. If you look, you'll see the Old Home Day. The fire department is about just under 170 hours. The police department is 395 hours, and Public Works is about 32. In total, this comes to about $45,676 that is requested for the departments to absorb within their budget.
Better than what John had estimated it.
So this does not include the elections, which John was including the elections along with that. Will come up to the 100,000. I'm not 100% sure, but you're looking at it being a good chunk. And again, that also depends on how many elections you have, what elections they are, as well as how, not trying to sound bad, but contested emotionally they are. Is I think a fair way to put it. Please let me know if I'm wrong on that. If you got, a happy, flowery one, we need less of a police presence. If you got a more intense, we need more police there to make sure that we don't have situations. But that's where this is. Again, these are not included in the proposed budget request. This is where we start talking about the items that were mentioned in the budget or mentioned in the presentation, but not necessarily asked for, just to give a heads up of, hey, this is what it would be. 6 additional officers, you can see right there. You're looking at just under 1.2 million. And then the body-worn cameras, you're looking at a total investment of 1.2. However, the per fiscal year, because it'll be spread out over 5 years, is just under 250,000. I broke it down in the bottom right where you'll see the first fiscal year because there's upfitting costs for the cruisers and the police officers that they don't reoccur. So after that first year, you'll see it drops to about 1,276,000.
Justin, did you put in there the traffic safety, the 2 officer proposal?
So that would be part of the 6 additional officers, if I'm correct in that understanding. Yes.
Is there a proposal where we just did the 2 or we do the 6?
This proposal here is for all 6.
Okay. Do we need all 6 to do that proposal? I just want to clarify.
Sir, that was asked of me what I need to fulfill all the obligations within the organization, including to traffic safety
Okay.
or traffic units. So the question was asked. I said ideally 6, because that way I would be able to increase staffing for the first time since 2007.
The reason I asked, Chief, is because I've got a very positive feedback from your proposal about the traffic safety, the 2 officers. So I was just wondering if there was a way we could break it out, because I think I got a very positive feedback from your proposal on the two officers.
Yeah, thank
To do
you.
just
I
traffic.
appreciate that feedback. That comes after years of sitting and participating in the Traffic Safety Committee, hearing the concerns of the citizens and the frustrations that they have when we hear people talk about they can't go to their mailbox,
Right.
or they're doing 70 down a 30 and all these unfortunate stories that we hear. So the part of that was being creative when we hear people at town council meetings say, give public safety what they need. I said this 3 years ago, I'm only coming here for needs, not wants. You don't want to see my want list because you don't have all night. But I'm mature and I'm responsible and I'm a taxpayer, not in this town, but 2 other towns. So I get it. I understand what it means.
So I'm just
the
wondering-
traffic safety part, though, you're right. It is one of those things where I don't know what else to do for the community to ease those concerns because I don't have the people. And as I said last time, I'm not trying to cause a false public alarm or cry wolf or make any of these crazy assumptions. When we can only devote 6 hours a week, call it 7, it was 6.9, so it's 7 hours a week to combat these issues that each and every one of you have on your roads. I don't know what to tell you. I don't have officers to be out there, but with the 2 traffic unit that we could run year round, it would be during the commuting hours based on the strategic and practical data that we would put together to show what those hours are. And up to 80 hours a week is a heck of a lot better than 7.
Right. So I guess I'm asking you,
So
Justin, and the chief.
for just the 2
Yeah.
officers,
We have all those.
Yeah.
you don't. So the initial cost would be about $389,912. The reoccurring cost would be about $313,062.
So could we break that out in the warrant article? Just
If
because I'm
we were to
thinking,
do a warrant article for it, if you guys instruct us to go forward with that, I absolutely can have it just be the 2 if you would like.
the reason the reason I suggest that is people see 1 million, they might say, no, I don't want that. But there's people that really want the traffic safety. Like they're telling me that's what they want. And if we put 350,000 on the ballot, that might get a yes check mark. I'm just saying if there's a way to break it out because I'm
we
getting
have
really
that,
positive
so-
feedback from your.
Yeah, we have that broken down to the penny pretty well.
Yeah.
We put a lot of thought into that, so it's all ready to go.
I have the pennies here, but I went with around it, and their numbers.
So I see Sarah diligently taking notes. Can we just pin splitting the 2?
Yep, absolutely.
For when we start getting into that.
367, 801, 20.
Now, Chief, is it really prudent for just 2, or do you really need maybe more than just 2 officers for traffic
Ted,
enforcement?
that's another good question. So how it was proposed to us was just that. This was what we were seeing from being at the town council meetings. Councilor Farrell had asked, ideally, what do you really need to make all this work? And I said, well, ideally, it would be 6. That way I'd be able to increase staffing for the first time since 07. I would be able to put an additional detective in detectives where we've been neglected since 2014. And then I'd be able to add the CP, community policing officer, to my vision plan, which is the K9 Rio, and Sean Benoit to be the full-time member. We used to have a community policing officer, community relations, back in 2004. And then due to cuts in that 2004 to 7 time frame, that position was taken away from the citizens. So that is on the wish list.
I guess I meant just on traffic enforcement alone.
Yes.
Would you want more than just 2?
Yes,
or?
and here's why, Ted. Because of the leadership over here in our analyst wizard that I dubbed Sergeant Bucher, we're able to really break these things down. And with all the traffic equipment that we have, we're able to then take that and find the areas and the timeframes of concern. So
Gotcha.
we wouldn't just have 2 officers out there Monday through Friday riding around together 8 to 4. We would have some in the early morning when the major commute times, the school zones, things of that nature.
I just want to make sure that
Yeah,
you're
Ted, I
asking for what you
think
really
2 would
need.
be ideal. I think that would be a great place to start. If I said to you 4, and then I realized we have too much time on our hands, and that would be a waste of a resource and a waste of taxpayer dollars. So I think the 2 is like everything else. A bird in the hand is better than 2 in the bush. I would take that, I would run with it, and we would make it work.
and I'm just suggesting the breakdown because
Absolutely.
of the budget we're in and the amount of increase we're looking at for the tax rate. I think the voters, at least the ones I've talked to, want the 2 officers. They really want that.
Yeah, we have a traffic problem in town. It's
Yeah.
no secret. We hear it all the time, right?
Yeah.
And that's the other reason why I had mentioned, I think it's time we encourage the town council to look at that 30 mile an hour throughout our community. It's time, it's important.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So one thing I see up there that I think honestly will help us save money over time is the body worn cameras. It's, I do like to save money, but when it comes to safety issues with our officers and stuff that can be used for evidence, can help just provide better policing, get Londonderry up to where it should be. That's something on there that I think is a definite savings and a super value to get us the
Council,
equipment we need.
that's a great point as well. A lot of great points being made up here. This is a program and a resource and a liability that we should have done a long time ago. But as you guys are well aware, sitting up here as budget committee members, you guys are tasked with the inevitable, the hardest decisions for the voices of the people that put you there. So for us, it's important to get this back on there for those people that work with us to provide a service for you. And as I mentioned at the last meeting, I don't want to be the chief that sits there and I can't tell a spouse why I didn't have a camera. And if an officer, hopefully it never happens here, but it's inevitable. These things do happen. If an officer is ever involved in an officer-involved shooting or an attack or something at a school, and I don't have that available, I have to look at the spouse and say, we didn't have it because it was too much money. I have to look at that spouse and say, your husband or wife is going to be placed on leave until this investigation is cleared. Had I had that, he or she could be back to work and your household wouldn't be upside down right now. And I think that it's a great point, Councilor. They're not cheap. And as we've said before, if there were cheaper options, we've already done it. We applied for 2 grants in the past. We are out of luck. So now we're at the point now where we have to go this route. As I said earlier in my first presentation, my projections were 3 to 5 year windows to get these things done. But because of the temperature from the community at those town council meetings is why we put this before you folks as a, could be an additional item for the budget committee to hear.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Good. Please continue, Justin.
So fire department additional items. I did it in 2 ways, one with 15 members per battalion and then one with 17 members per battalion. I noticed in their side, they also asked for 3 additional TCOs. The new ladder truck, which as I mentioned, you won't see the calculations for that because that is one of the warrant articles that you'll see in your sheet you currently have. Repair and renovation of Station 2 is also something that was mentioned, and establishing an EMS revolving fund. So 16 full-time firefighters would get us to 17 members per battalion. And you're looking at the cost there. 8 full-time firefighters will get us to 15, and you're looking at the cost there as well. You're looking at 1.2, just under 1.3 for 8, and then 2.5 for 16. I'm sure the fire will jump up and let me know if I'm wrong, but I believe the NFPA standard is 17. I could be wrong on that. They're coming up, so maybe I am.
It's 17 for a commercial building and 15, 16 for a residential building. I'd like to point out that we didn't propose these numbers. Okay, so I just want to make that clear that did not come from us. And the 3 full-time dispatchers and the Station 2 renovation were things in the future, not this year. And I'm just making that clear because our one goal this year, and this isn't at you, Justin, I'm just making it clear, our one goal this year was to just make sure that the overtime was funded appropriately and that these are future things that we need to consider. But with that being said, yes.
So this, as I said, this was to clarify the items that were addressed in the meeting, that there may have been confusion whether they were included in the proposed budget. This was not their request.
Yeah.
This, again, was me trying to identify the items that were spoken, discussed, and there may have been confusion about whether they were included in the budget or not, and I don't want any confusion next year if somebody says, well, wait a minute, I voted for the operating budget. Why aren't we staffing at 15?
Yep.
So we're all on the same page. These are additional items.
And I very much appreciate that. And while that may be staffing, it's a different approach. This is in a different category. So thank you.
And again, I think that there has to be a reasonable approach and time and planning to accomplish goals, right? And so our approach was to get the budget to an area that supports 13, right? And then utilizing our minds, I guess, plan for the future, right? Because if we're not looking to the future, then we're going to be behind, right? But again, in this year's budget, it was 13. Understanding that these things are coming down the road, but should probably not be tackled in this singular
Again,
year.
that's why you saw 6 patrol officers. This is what was discussed to separate it out so everybody's aware, so there's minimal confusion going forward on what was in the operating versus what was their ideas for the future, not ideas, their plans for the future, their hopes and ability to better provide for the citizens of Londonderry.
Question. So planning for the future, right? What's our indicator that we need this? Like, what should we look at? Like, as a community, like, is it population? Is it number of calls?
It's population. It's call volume increase.
Okay.
It's industrial growth. It's through traffic growth. So it's how many people are coming to Londonderry either to work or the amount of people that travel through Londonderry on any given day. We do probably one of the highest amounts of car accidents in the state, and it's because of our through traffic and the highway. Okay. You know, so those are the things we look at. We look at call volume growth as part of that, and then we take into account construction growth, what that is, whether that's apartments or industrial buildings or, you know, entertainment or restaurants or things of that nature.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, yeah, I was going to say, if you don't mind, just stick around real quick.
Sure.
Again, the repairs renovations, it's estimated 1.3. This is, as Phil said, for the future, not in the operating budget this year. One of the things that we're looking at potentially for this year, however, is to establish an EMS revolving fund. I've reached out to the town of Exeter and spoke with their fire chief regarding it. What this will do is we'll have to get more detail. I just wanted to touch base with you guys, let you know it is something we're looking into. We'll have to get more detail on the actual impact because taking the ambulance revenue from the fire department's budget and moving it to an EMS revolving will increase the tax rate because we no longer have that revenue to offset it. However, the tax rate will decrease. That was supposed to be decrease on the bottom one. When we move the certain EMS expenses out of the general fund budget to the revolving fund. I don't know what the nexus is going to be. I'm still working with the Exeter, and I'm going to work with Fred and Phil to determine what that will potentially be, but it is something that we're looking at to see if it could be beneficial or if the town wants to move forward in that fashion.
Any questions?
And I'm all done with you now.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief.
The Leach Library additional items, as I said, the warrant article is on there for a full-time children's librarian. One of the questions was asked with the Leach Library, what will allow them to thrive. I'm going to have Aaron come up to discuss.
Thank you. So I believe at the last meeting, it was mentioned what could we do with $100,000 to thrive? I believe a question was asked. So obviously this has not been approved by the trustees. This would be something we would have to review with them. But in just casual conversation with my assistant director, if we had an extra $100,000, we would potentially request to the trustees 2 part-time employees. That would provide an additional 56 hours a week. They would not be covered by health insurance, so that would not be a factor. We would also add $1,000 to our mileage line. This, it was brought up at the last trustees meeting regarding homebound delivery. This mileage amount would go toward that service, obviously looking into other things and see what that looks like. We would also add to our management services account to be able to potentially set up a library cafe space. This is a space that has been asked from our patrons before. It would be minimal food. We're not talking egg and cheese sandwiches here. We're just talking but coffee and some snacks, as well as adding to our books and periodical line. This would allow for an increase in the physical and digital resources, more with keeping up with those increasing costs of those services. And then our maintenance line would allow for building and furniture and other items within the library to keep up with those repairs. So we would break that out with the 2 part-time and then adding to those line items if that was a possibility. We also looked at potentially if we only got half of that, again, it would be those same line items, but would be 1 part-time employee. So those are just some of the options that we looked at. But of course, this would have to be reviewed and discussed with the library trustees.
Any questions?
Yes. So this is what I'm talking about. This is not directed at you, Aaron.
Okay.
This is directed at all of us here. Just throw out $100,000? Really? Come on. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So, and I appreciate you bringing that to us. I just, right now, I don't see the reason in just throwing $100,000 to throw $100,000. I think the trustees came up with a budget that they thought would be appropriate for the town. I know that you worked with them on that. Try and be as, responsible as you could be. Fiscally, I just do not see the reason to why just to do it. Just throw 100,000 to throw 100,000. Not for this year. I mean, if we want to take a look at over time, if there are things that different wants that the library has, and maybe if it coming up as a warrant article in future years for the voters to decide on, instead of just being a part of the budget, I would like to see that as a conversation later on. And
so the only reason
I'm sorry. Wouldn't this be a warrant article? Is that?
I thought it was
that would be up to the town council whether they want to include it in the operating budget, or if they want it to be separate. That would be up to the library trustees, the town council, and budget committee whether they want to include it in the operating budget or have it be a separate warrant article. It would not be part of the default, but you could offer it as part of the proposed budget.
Okay.
I apologize for any interruption. I'm bringing this to you because this was a request by a budget committee member. Just bringing it to you. The additional amount would be very helpful for us to thrive and continue our services and continue to offer more services. I totally understand that this is not an option for this year. I just want the budget committee and the town council to understand our needs going forward. And I understand even next year, this is probably not something that's going to be possible. But down the line, in order for us to continue our services and our programs and our staffing and the additional materials that we're offering, we're looking at this kind of move up option. But this was simply a request from a committee member that I'm bringing forward.
Yeah, and that ask came from seeing the overwhelming support when all the GMILKs discussion was going on. People really love the library. They really appreciate the services that the library has to offer. So if you had a little bit more, which according to the $62,500 in appropriations on 0.1%, this is less than $10 a year on a $500,000 home. So we're not talking a ton of extra money taxpayer-wise. It's $10 a year, not $10 a month, less than $10 for the year, which will allow the library to, have that little bit more. And again, with the overwhelming support that I saw for the library, I figured it was worth bringing to the table, seeing what Erin would have to offer and how the taxpayers felt about it.
And I do appreciate the opportunity to bring this forward to let people know what our needs are, our realistic needs are. Our budget our increase from last year for our budget is less than fire, police, and DPW. It's less than 5%. So I do believe that our ask this year is reasonable and appropriate. But I do know that going forward, we will need more, as any department would. And so that's why I brought those options to you. But again, nothing has been discussed with the trustees, and I don't anticipate a change in our budget based on that request.
Okay, and then the second, the full-time children's librarian.
Yes.
Right. The children's you do have someone there that's running the children's portion.
We have a department head.
Right. Okay. And right now, do we really need another someone else on staff?
Yes. Yes, we do.
Could you accomplish if it was only a part-time instead of a full-time?
I'm sorry?
What could you accomplish if it was only a part-time addition instead of a full-time addition?
That person would be in the children's room as the full-time would be. However, the reason we're asking for a full-time is to help with the additional, we've had more people visiting our programs in our library this year than we have in the past 3 years. So This would be to accommodate those services that are, right now strapped. I mean, we had 2 people call out sick in a one day, and then we had to stop a children's program because we didn't have enough staff to manage it. Having a full-time person there would be assistance of that. So the person in the children's room right now is a department head. She's mainly in the children's room. That's her job, obviously, as department head. And the rotation of staff that is at that service desk are library technicians. They're not trained. I mean, this is no offense to my staff. I have an amazing staff, and they're very knowledgeable. But this person would have an MLS, so they would have some experience with collection development, even assist with budget management of that department regarding collection development, assist with putting together programs, managing outreach, all of that, which our current library technicians cannot do. So I'm sorry.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, this position would have a little more on their plate than what we currently have in our at the service desk there.
And the library is open 60 hours a week, so one full-time staff person can't cover all 60 hours.
That's correct.
And an additional staff person would bring that up to 80 hours a week, which allows for 20 hours a week of overlap between the 2 full-time staff people for things like Saturdays, where it's probably a lot busier. Holidays, it accounts for probably vacation time and things like that, and other things. Yeah,
and having a full-time children's librarian in that room with the department head would allow those technicians to assist in other areas of the library where we are lacking, other department areas, other service opportunities.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes. So is this just talking about the additional items and not what's in here in the big budget book? So that'll be later.
So this is the children's librarian is a warrant article. So if you look at one of the front pages where
Is that
it was
what you presented on last?
Yes,
Okay,
I did that on Saturday.
Then I do have questions about that then.
Okay.
Okay, so currently the library has 80% of their budget dedicated solely to salaries, right? And if you add in another person, even though you budgeted about $49,000 for that position, you wanted someone with masters of library science. Those are more expensive than that. And if you want to bring on that person full time, that would bring you up to 85% salary. Balance, I guess. It just seems a little too top heavy for me.
Okay.
And I would love to see an area where you could cut besides furniture. That would be fantastic. That's just a request from me, though.
Are you do you have an amount to cut or?
Just see where you can kind of trim. That's all.
Okay. I just want to be able to bring something to the trustees to work with.
I just know salary-wise, looking at some of the other departments, that would be one of the higher ones as far as like salary versus the rest of the budget.
Any other questions?
No, thank you.
How's Oscar?
He's very well, thank you. Yeah.
He's on vacation right now.
No, he's back. He was only on vacation for the Veterans Day holiday. He's back.
He wasn't there today. My son was quite sad.
Oh, he hasn't come back yet. No, he's coming back. I think he's coming back tomorrow. Yeah. The staff member who took him home came in a little bit later, so the schedule was a little off. But he's currently on vacation, but he will be back. He loves to travel, so.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Justin. Please continue.
Yes. Just one item with this. So the insurance, that would be housed in the general fund's insurance department. We do that to allow us we budget a family here, but the open positions, it allows us to better segregate it out and not have to budget family across the board or anything like that. It allows us to take a look at what we currently have, and we do the calculation based on that historically or within the last couple of years. So this is the total cost for the additional cost. We just kind of had the breakdown of everything. Yeah.
This is a duplicate slide.
It is a duplicate slide.
Have you got,
I forgot to delete the
No worries.
one after I made it pretty.
the total number?
Way to go.
So if you
depends
look
on if you're
here,
doing
I have it
16 or
broken out
18
by what the
firefighters, John.
potential tax impact is.
Split the difference. What is the total additional spending? Appropriation, what's this line over here?
Give me one second.
My computer's not working, so I can't bring anything up.
So going with
Go with staffing at 15.
staffing at 15, do we want me to go with staffing for 2 officers or 6?
We talked heavily about 2.
Yeah, go with 2, because
use 2.
people really seem to want that.
So you're looking at an additional just under 2.8 million.
Which is pretty close to where we were talking about before. So 2.8 million on top of what we're proposing here.
Correct.
And what did we say? It's for every 66,000, it's a penny?
Around that.
Okay, so what's 66,000 into 2.8 million? Someone have that real quick?
You're looking at about 42, 43 cents.
All right, so that'd be 43 cents on top of $1.20.
So what's it with 17 and 6? The 6.
So 17, it would be, give me one second. 17 and 6, you'd be looking at 74 cents.
Okay.
All right, so we're talking about between, what did we just say? I'm sorry, it was.
Let's call it 43 because you round up.
43 to 76?
Yeah, 74.
74. So we're looking between $1.63 and $1.94. If if we did everything. So that's
Versus 54, which is up to the line before that.
well, if it's 54. We start at 54.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, totally agree. So $1.94 per thousand on 500. So $1,000 a household on a $500,000 house.
That's disgusting.
So that's, so if you're that, I'm just using 500,000 as I'm guessing that as an average in town. So then you put the 8.7 on from the schools. Let's say the schools go up, I don't know, let's say they go up 54 cents just for argument's sake. Now you're looking at $1,300 on a $500,000 house, which would be about the $500,000 house pay right now. The rate's $1,574.
So I have it for ours. A $500,000 house for us would be about $1,735.
And last year, the medium house was
So that's just, by the way,
$594.
just so everyone's aware, that is municipal only, not the entire tax
I'm
rate.
talking about it's $1,574, right? Is the total tax rate?
So that would
Right now?
be $7,870 if it's $1,574.
Okay, so today you pay $7,000. It's going to go up to $9,000.
And as Sean said, what's the average
If
price?
you do everything.
Yeah, because you did it on a $500,000 house, and I calculated this last year when I was looking at all the tax rates. It was $594 last year on the median house in Londonderry, so 500 is even below that.
$594.
Yeah, that's last year's prices.
So that's a 17.5% increase.
Yeah.
15,
And that's just our side.
Yep.
Now we add the schools in, you're looking at a 25% increase.
I don't think any of us are in favor of doing all of those things.
No.
I hope not, yeah.
Nope. Well, you're having the conversation, at least you're having it.
Right.
And the public needs to know what the numbers are.
Right.
And if the public wants to actually increase services and increase people who provide those services, they need to know what those numbers are.
Yes.
And we as the public servants of the town need to at least provide the information. And if people keep saying, we want this, we want this, we want this, but yet we're not providing that to them to actually vote upon and make a decision as a town with how our town government sits, then we're not doing our job. We're not providing the public what they're asking for.
Well, I guess that's one way to get the 4,000 plus voters out to vote.
I mean, let the people decide.
I don't certainly bring them out to vote.
We're providing the information, we're letting them decide.
I'm ready for all 17,000 to show up.
If we have such a,
So the question
word of
becomes
support.
is, and I'm having been having been my 15th budget now, the question becomes, is the same question that we have faced for the last many years. Are we working for essential services or are we working for excellent services? And that's the differential, and that's what you have to decide. All these years, we've always operated under essential services. Is it perfect? No. We've always gone to the voters and asked them what they wanted. Do you want more employees? And they almost always vote yes. I think only one time they voted no on a new employee initiative. So we've got to make a decision. How are we going to go back to the voters with this? Is it, and all we're really talking about here is the same thing we've been talking about for the last 10 years. Everything has been a phased approach.
I'll speak as one voter. If my taxes go up $2,000, I'm going to get out and vote. So.
Well, at least you didn't say you were going to move.
So, no, I'm not going to move, but, you know, we've had a lot of people come to these town council meetings and say that they can't afford to live in Londonderry. If their taxes go up $2,000, then they really can't afford to live here. And then we're not doing our due diligence as a town council and as a budget committee.
But then I hear on the other end all the time.
We're saying the same thing.
I know.
Yeah.
I hear on the other end, though, we're such an affluent community. Why don't we have these things? But then you have people who vote no on that.
Cost $2,000 more on the taxes.
Well, you can't have it one way, but then want it the other way, right?
But in all honesty, it's the first time in many years we've had an extremely honest conversation versus tight the belt, hold the line. And that's what the town's done for 10 years. And and it's good that we're having this conversation. I'm not happy about it, but it's good.
Right. I mean, I just feel like there's a lot of people in town who want a lot of things for the town, but then don't want to pay for it. So I'm tired of hearing the other end of people complaining that we don't have it, but then they don't want to pay for it.
Ted, the average
so where's the even line?
The average taxpayer doesn't understand that when they vote yes on a warrant article, their taxes are going up. They do not understand that.
How do they
So
not
we need to
understand
educate them because they don't. They come to me and they say, "Why are my taxes going up?" And I ask them, "How do they vote on the warrant articles?" They say, "Well, I voted yes on everything." And then they say,
Okay.
well, "Why my taxes go up?" They don't understand that. They need.
But I made the statement last year, if you vote yes, your taxes are going up.
Yes.
And I got lambasted for it in social media and in the newspaper. Okay? If you vote yes, your taxes are going up. I mean, you know, and I said this many times here. I don't know how much longer I'm going to do this. This is all your guys' problems.
I mean, the reality is, yes, there's giving information, but I think people at home, when they see us up here Black Friday shopping with everyone's tax dollars, I think that gets a little irresponsible. And I think, yeah, people are going to vote and they'll see, you know, who wants to spend a lot, who wants to be a little more, and they can vote for us up here too, in that manner.
It's the perception too.
But see, the job is for us to try to figure out what the right services are and what's essential services. That's the job. We're not going to get it perfect every time. People want to have improved services. They've made that known. What does that mean? And that's really what we got to figure. That's why I asked for more workshops, because that's what we have to figure out. And as you and I discussed on the phone one day, the answer's always in the middle. Right? I'm not saying it's in the middle and it should be in the middle of the tax rate, but I'm saying the answer's somewhere in the middle. So we need to decide as a group, what are we going to do?
I think the other thing that doesn't get talked about enough is we're always talking about how we're spending money, but don't spend a lot of conversation and a lot of time talking about how we can bring in additional money.
I agree.
Oh, we bring in a lot of money, and we spend, and you'd be shocked how much time we spend on it.
Yeah, but our conversation is usually focused around what, even thus far in the budget process, all we've talked about is what are we going to spend, where are we going to spend it, what's reasonable, right? And those are the right questions. But I would like to have a little bit of a conversation about the revenue side of it and what has changed, or what is changing for 2026 as far as revenue goes. At some point,
Who do you think the largest group of residential taxpayers are in this town?
Seniors on fixed incomes.
The 55 and older community, who live in 55 and older communities, pay $12 million in taxes. They are the largest group. They're the one demanding certain services. So they're going to come out and they're going to vote. 75 cents on every dollar we bring in, and this is why I know we bring in a lot of revenue, goes to the schools. I'm going to get in trouble for this, but we had 5,600 kids in the schools and over 1,000 employees. They were our largest community. We now have 3,950 kids in the schools and we have under 1,000 employees. It's a shrinking community. And they spend 75% of the tax dollars. I'm not advocating to change it or do anything differently. What I'm saying is the demographic of the town has changed. And I've been saying this for 10 years. It's changing, and we're not changing with it. Those are the questions we need to answer. And again, I understand I'm going to get in trouble for saying anything about the schools, and I'm not advocating we change anything at the schools. But they spend 75 cents on every tax dollar.
I don't think the right thing to do is catch up to their rate either.
I'm not suggesting that. What I'm suggesting is we need to identify what are the essential services needed to run the town. That's what I'm suggesting. And what are those things that, first you got to say, what can't we live without? And then you got to ask you, and driving more revenue? We've doubled and tripled revenue in the last 10 years. You know, our motor vehicle revenue goes up almost $1 million every year, right?
It's significant.
We get over $1 million a year out of the rental car companies up at the airport. Imagine that would go away. And we work hard to keep that.
What I think I hear some of the committee and the council members say is, would it be enough time? Would the 18th give you enough time to talk and put together some revenue? All right, thanks. So yes.
Behind you, you have what we currently have for the estimated revenues. And this is one, I will be honest, I go extra conservative on this or I try to go extra conservative on this because if I say we're going to get more revenue and it turns out come tax rate setting time, I'm wrong. That means that tax rate the voters approved is increasing. And I don't want to do that. I don't think that's fair to the taxpayers. I'd rather have lower estimates and revenues during this process so they know it hopefully will only get better. I can't guarantee that because it also depends on the assessed values and various other factors. But I try to go lower end on this during the budget process because good news results in a lower tax rate. And I'd rather have the voters vote for something higher than lower and have it end up being higher, if that makes sense.
Yep. Justin, when's the next valuation for residential?
So we just did a full one this past, not 24, but 23, I believe.
Next year.
So it would be next year.
We do them every 2 to 3 years now versus 5 years so that we don't have that spike and everything. The other reason we're doing them is that if we wait the 5 years, commercial doesn't move as quickly as residential does, or at least the trends aren't showing that way. So if we do them every 2 to 3 years, we can capture the commercial piece at the same time so that we can keep the tax rate, flat. We used to be like 58% commercial and then 42% residential. It's done this. It's the opposite way now.
And the other thing to keep in mind with that is if the difference between the residential, the equalization rate drops below a certain threshold, essentially we lose every abatement that a commercial property files. So that's by doing
Explain that in more detail.
What?
We need to explain that in more detail. We have to be between 90 and 110%. Yep. And if we drop below 90%, every commercial property files an abatement against us. And the way the law is written, we lose every one. So that's why we're at like 96, 95, 94 right now?
I think 94. I could be wrong on that, but it's not, yeah.
So that's the, so we really should be at 100, 110 to protect ourselves, and then the tax rate would go down, but it would still take the same amount of money to run the community. But the way residential is fluctuating, you can't really hit the number. It's hard.
So with the revenues, I do that. And as I mentioned in the kickoff meeting, like the interest on investments, I left that where it is because we're expecting a cut in November, potentially in December. So I don't want to put something high there where it looks great. And then all of a sudden turns out they cut it significantly and we have to cut it at that point. Motor vehicles, as was pointed out, I mean, back in 21, we budgeted $8.3 million. This year we budgeted, or for the tax rate setting, we budgeted 9.5. So that's a pretty significant increase in what the motor vehicle will be.
Where is that, 9.5?
You won't see it up there yet because that's still last year's. I'm waiting for the tax rate to be set, and then I'll switch that over to 9.5.
Gotcha.
So I'm able to talk about it. I'm waiting for the tax rate to be set to know what we actually fully have in there, because I'm able to use what we've had so far to calculate what we think it will be.
And to give you an idea, I mean, that was down in the 6 millions, probably not that long ago.
Not that long ago. In 2018, it was 7.5.
So Justin, what are some examples of state aid and departmental income?
So state aid would be things such as meals and rooms, highway block grant, items like that. That again, we essentially, when it comes to state aid, we get the number from the state. That's it. Have a great day. See you later. I use what we had last year until we get this year's number, because historically it has remained either flat or increased. So again, once we get our tax rate set, I'll have that number. That number will bump up, and you'll have what we have for fiscal year 25's budgeted for 26. That way, again, we don't have a decrease if I were to try to estimate based on previous percentages or use the formula they have and try to guess what we're getting in meals and rooms revenue statewide. Departmental income, that's essentially that's building. Is that building permits on there? No, it's not. So that is the transfer station, ambulance revenue. Give me 1 second. Let me pull up my cheat sheet on this.
The thing to keep in mind is the tax rate isn't going to get set until right before Thanksgiving, which means the bills aren't going to be until probably end of December. So as we're going through this and everything, everyone's going to see the increase in the tax rate that came from last year's vote that no one's going to remember. So people are going to see that and then see this budget, and they're going to go, "What's going on?" And those are all the things you got to weigh when we're going through this. So people say, "Well, why do you stay so close to default and tighten your belt?" Because we're always a year behind. People don't remember that they voted yes the year before. And this is really an honest conversation we're having with the community.
So departmental revenue, cable franchise fees, essentially the small amounts from senior affairs, recreation. Then you have the waste container, drop-off center, ambulance, dispatch, various police ones, zoning reviews. That pretty much makes up the majority of it.
About 1.2 million of that is cable and ambulance, right?
Correct.
Does Fidium pay anything? Because I know they're going fiber.
So at this point, they don't. It's only Comcast.
Just Comcast.
We only have a contract with Comcast.
Only a contract, Comcast.
Right, because they're on the lines, and but that's the only one we have.
Yeah, but I know Fidium is in town because I just jumped onto Fidium for fiber.
So they don't, under the regulation, they didn't have to come to us for a contract.
Okay.
But kind of to put it in perspective too, we have 650 up there for interest revenue. And as of when I submitted this back in beginning of October, beginning of September, around there, I had budgeted 1.1 million for interest. That one fluctuates based on the rates, and essentially, you'll hear me say, keep fund balance, because that allows me to build up the interest on this, which lowers the tax rate for this year, without using the funds that then disappear for next year, if that makes sense.
Okay. Any other comments before we close the budget workshop? Is there anything else?
No, in terms of this, you'll look and you'll see the pilot payments increase as well, because New Balance has come online for the pilot payment. Along with that, you have that pretty much covers it. The other one is you'll have sewer revenue, and where is it? I have it in transfers from capital reserve and trust funds. You'll see the 219. What that is the administrative fee for the sewer fund, as well as the administrative fee for the airport, and $25,000 from the cemetery trustees to assist with the cost of maintaining the cemeteries.
But the sewer fund is flat, it's self-funded.
Sewer fund is flat, but however, because they draw on our resources, we do charge them an administrative fee for that.
Gotcha.
Now, Justin, how much does the New Balance pilot payment affect our taxes?
So I believe this year we budgeted $125,000, which would be just about 2 cents, roughly around that.
But isn't their pilot program more than that?
New Balance?
Yeah.
It's calculated based on the percentage of, it's the percentage of improvement from the previous year.
So
and
will
then
the
what
following year be more?
It should be, depending on what the tax rate is.
Thank you.
And depending on how much they've improved everything else.
Right.
Because it increases their tax, not credit, but essentially the payment difference increases then decreases.
It will go up based on, it was an April 1 number, so it will go up based on what's happening after April 1.
Oh, well then, yeah, the following year, once they're now fully open and operational and completing construction, that should
That's
go
why
up.
it's not as much.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
So I have a question. What happened to the CIP? It's like last year's in the budget book, the CIP meeting.
We are still working on developing a meeting.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else from the budget committee?
I think we can table it till next time.
Yep.
The 18th? Anything else from the council regarding budget workshop stuff? All right, seeing none, we will conclude our budgets workshop. Do you guys want to stay up here while we finish up, or do you want to take off?